Through his unbelievable global expeditions and brilliant storytelling, he is here to challenge all of us to rethink how we approach discovery, resilience, and the power of human curiosity. Get ready for an incredible ride. Please give a warm Think Summit welcome to Albert Lin.
Our ancient history is full of incredible stories. They're the stories I want to tell.
Here we go! Albert Lin. Explorer.
This is carved out of the earth, huh?
Adventurer.
We're wading into uncharted waters.
Scientist.
We've got the first scans. It's pretty awesome, right?
He has one foot in the past and the other in the future.
I had to rethink my world, my identity, my purpose. I had learned your barriers are entirely in your mind.
He's risking everything to learn more about our past.
It's incredible. Out of the darkness comes the ancient past.
So we can understand the present.
The answers might be just right there.
And define our future.
Thank you. I have them play that video before I wake up every morning. For everything. I have my kids watch that video before I pick them up at school, just to set the tone. What a space, what a group. I thought I was coming to play pickleball. Did anybody ever bring their pickleball racket? This is a group of storytellers. That's what is actually at the core of our oldest technology, storytelling. And this is one of my favorite early stories that I found once right on the edge of the Arctic Circle. It's a 7,000-year-old story. Anybody want to take a guess at what this story is about? I think it's a fish tale, right? It's like this fisherman who's like, I caught this fish the size of a bear. And you all know that the fish was really small. It was never the size of a bear. But he was telling a good story that left its mark for 7,000 years. And, that's the power of bringing your imagination out and sharing it with the world. My story began not as a rugged explorer searching for lost cities, but as this kind of, maybe wandering lost kid. That's me. Waiting for the racquetball court one day with my cool racquetball shirt, but wondering how I get beyond that line, that little barrier to get access. I remember I grew up all over the world. My father was an astrophysicist, and my mother was a musician and an actress. So we kind of lived bouncing around wherever you could get a job doing that kind of thing. It's hard to get a job thinking about the universe, which he did somehow, and then my mom would follow, and she would teach us about how you could feel something that you couldn't quite describe just through a sound. But I felt like I was missing something tied to my roots. I didn't really ever feel connected to any one land. And then I met my grandfather, who I was really disconnected to for a long time as well, and he told me that we had this thing. Has anybody here ever been told that they had a blue birthmark on their lower back when they were born? Raise your hand if that is true. Yeah? Well, we might be relatives then. Anybody else? Like a lower birthmark? Yeah? Okay, got it. Do you know what that's called? Do you know what people call that? The Mongolian spot. The Mongolian spot. You might be part Mongol. My grandfather told me he thought we came from the north because of that spot, this birthmark that goes away after a couple of years. It was like a stamp, like we got you. But I didn't know anything about that. So I sold everything I had. I moved into my car for a little while. I raised enough money to be able to get a plane ticket to Mongolia. I was right out of grad school, and I ended up finding these people that I was able to connect with, even without language. And they taught me the way of the nomad, how to live. I had this crazy dream. I had my first handheld GPS. I was gonna get to the edge of the capital. I was gonna buy a horse and ride out and live with these nomads. And this Mongolian woman, she saw me on the train and she goes, Albert, you're going to die. There's no way. But she connected me to her uncle, and this uncle taught me this other reality. They told me a story about Genghis Khan, which had not been marketed well in modern history. The story that I grew up with as a kid was one that was, I think, mostly defined by Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventures. Do you guys remember that movie? Where he's running around San Dimas Mall with a bat, beating up mannequins. That's not what the Mongols thought of their story. They thought their story was one of the most important symbols of unity amongst their people. Genghis Khan rose out of nothing to create this single contiguous empire, the largest in human history in a single lifetime. Defying this tribal warfare that had been ripping them apart as a community of basically nomads. And when I got there, I started asking, why has this story not been really known? Why is this story that I'm hearing from the Mongols, who my grandfather said we were a part of, tied up in this misunderstanding? Well, maybe not he was still ruthless, he was still brutal, right? But his history was written by his enemies. There was never a painting of Genghis Khan while he was alive. There was never a story written by his own people. There was never a single one of the imperial family's burials ever found. And to the Mongols, if you disturbed the tomb, even if you found it, you would cause this curse that ends the world. And as a little kid, I was like, ooh, Indiana Jones, that sounds just right. That's the kind of thing to try to figure out how to solve. And I'm an engineer. I have a bunch of degrees in engineering. So I'm like, well, let me find a different way to try to search without digging. I heard there's some platform about the Da Vinci mobile platform or something like that. Is that right? So I was in this lecture by this bioengineer who was searching for the ultimate lost Leonardo that was hidden in the Piazza Vecchio. That he had these historical records that described this void that might be hidden between these two walls. And he was using a biomedical engineering approach to try to find this void. So I thought, well, maybe let me do the same thing. Let me try to come up with a way where I can look across a vast scope of land with a high-tech approach that allows me to search for a needle in a haystack without touching the haystack. And again, I sell everything I have at the time, and I'm like, okay, if I give myself 1 year to raise funds and I can figure out how to convince everybody that this is possible, then maybe I'll be able to get a grant or something, I don't know. And I was right out of grad school, and I turned to my mom and I told her I'm gonna do this, and she's like, get a job, do something. She's like, what are you talking about, Albert? But I remember I took the National Geographic magazine and I flipped over to the back and it had this banner with all these names, and I just started emailing anybody I could. I'd make up these fake emails or whatever, or just imagined emails of what there is, something like Terry at NGS or something. I just come up with these things. I just blasted it into the black hole. And eventually somebody actually responded to me. And before you know it, 6 months later, I have my first grant. And I'm off to the mountains of Mongolia. It was like, what? This is actually happening? This is real? This is my team. We're carrying, satellites and drones and radar. And we have a bunch of goats because I had a budget of $2 per day per person for food. So we had to carry our goats with us. We had a bunch of bottles of ketchup because the national vegetable of Mongolia is ketchup. And that was it. And this is what it feels like when you're in the field of Mongolia. At night, we'd build these yurts. The yurts were the same dwellings as the nomad has always used. And then these storms would come whipping through these plains, and they'd bring lightning down all around us. And we were inside our yurts trying to charge our gear, afraid, really afraid that everything would get fried, but it would pass. And then in the night, the stars would come out, and we'd start hanging out with our Mongol colleagues, and we'd sing our songs. They would teach us their songs. This is the sound of a Mongol song of the land. And when I listened to this, I felt like I was being drawn back further and further into something more primordial, something, almost instinctual. And then they would ask us to sing our songs, like, what kind of song do you have? And the only song we all collectively knew was Thriller, so it wasn't a great response, but we had a good time. On this first expedition, we went further and further into an area that I had read about in the notes of Marco Polo. And it was an area known as the Ikurik, or the Forbidden Precinct. It's 6,000 square kilometers of forest that have really been unexplored. And the only people that are allowed to go there now are shamans who still worship a specific mountain in the center of this 6,000 square kilometer zone, right on the border of Russia and Mongolia, and the president of Mongolia whenever that person is elected. And we were using ultra high resolution satellite imagery and getting lots and lots of people to sift through that data together in the first crowdsourced expedition that National Geographic's ever done, where we were getting the community at large to stare and say, oh, there's an anomaly there, or there's something there, and then we'd ride out on horseback to try to go see what they were seeing. And right at the center of this zone, there was this blue dot. I was like, what's that blue dot? A couple of days later, we ended up there, on top of this one particular mountain, and on top of that blue dot was this giant shrine. You see that big banner up there? That's known as the soul banner. And it's got horsehairs blowing in the wind, trying to catch the power of the person it belongs to. The himar is what they call it, the wind power of a soul. I was there with this person who I'd become really close friends with over the years, who actually became my sworn blood brother, somebody known as an anda. Genghis Khan had an anda, right? And this person, Amra, we're standing there, and as we're descending, because all these storms pick up again every afternoon, I see him moving down off the side of the northeast side of this mountain range, and I feel like I'm literally looking through time. There was this legend that Genghis Khan had been dismantled down to the lowest part of his life. His father had been killed, his love had been stolen by the enemies of his father. He had been sent off to the mountains to die, and he climbed this mountain in particular, the Burkhan Khaldun, and somehow they found this himar, or wind power, to change his fate. And then the fate of all of us, because that legacy changed the world. And it's why we have our blue spot. As we're moving down off the side of that mountain, we make our way into the tree line, and the wind's picking up, and trees are falling down all around us. And we start looking in the roots of these trees the next day on this middle plateau. My buddy was a geologist who had actually spent his childhood in Colorado looking in the roots of trees for arrowheads. And like all these trees fall down and they rip up this window into the earth. And we're looking around, although we can't dig, all of a sudden we have this window. And my friend Charles, he calls over, he says, Albert, come over here. And he holds out this little thing behind this giant tree root. And I remember all of a sudden that, like the hairs on the back of my head just, and he hands it to me. And all of a sudden I'm looking at this, what is this thing? It's like a lion's face staring at me. And when I flipped it over, I saw the fingerprint of the person who had made it embedded into the clay. And I put my thumb in that fingerprint. And I felt like I was all of a sudden there. I was that person. That piece of clay has been dated with thermoluminescent dating, and it comes back to exactly the time of Genghis Khan's death. And there's a brick right behind it. I'm like, what is this? So we start pulling out all of our tech, and we start using ground-penetrating radar, and we start putting all these stakes in the ground. We start measuring the resistivity across the ground, and we're looking for anything that might be beneath the tree roots, and there's this void. There's some kind of void deep down below us as we're walking across. But then I'm like, my feet are crunching under me on this grass. It feels like a carpet. It's like, and we start looking, just not digging, but just looking in the tree roots, and we start piecing together that we're standing right on top of a roof. We've got some kind of ancient roof. This whole journey takes, the next couple of years, actually. doing all this systematic exploration. On the last expedition, in the last couple of weeks, the sound of these trucks start making their way up this valley, and I'm like, well, you know, I get this call on the radio saying, Albert, you better come down, there's something going on. We have never, in 3 years, seen anybody come to this site. It was the most remote site I'd ever been to. It was the beginning of my career, and all of a sudden, I'm being told that there is these 7 shaman, and you can only see the person in the window there, that have come to worship this mountain. And they found out that we're there, and that my Mongolian colleague, Professor Ishto, she goes, Albert, the head shaman, he wants to see you at sundown and to judge your soul. I'm like, oh, shit. Because in Mongolia, your soul is measured in your smell, right? So I was like 3 weeks in the field. My soul was funky. But you know, it was this moment of judgment. And while we didn't take any videos or we weren't able, you know, I really didn't feel like the moment would be to take any photos, I recorded the sound of the drums that night. And I wrote in my journal, and I want to just play you the sound of these drums and tell you the story of what happened. I'm sitting in front of this shrine, and this shaman, he has me kneel in front of him. He's got these headband with these eyes painted into the forehead, and these long black cords dangling down in front of his face. You can't see him. He's beating this drum over my head. Boom. And in my heart, I could feel my heart become entrained into the drum. I could feel all of a sudden as if my own heartbeat was in that drum. He had these long dangling cords that spun around him and made these little bells. These sound of like magic. And I'm kneeling down in front of him, and this thing speeds up. The sound of this drum, the beat of this heart, this feeling through the air explodes. And then he collapses. It's just like, oh. And I'm sitting there in front of him, and I'm not moving my head. I'm just terrified. And he's got this long dangling cord, and he just starts sitting, and he's twitching. He's twitching like a bird, like a crow. It's like, and he would make these sounds of 3, like that. I just recently read my notes on this, and it was like, it was surreal. And then he sits back, and he kind of stumbles back, and then his attendant, he hands him this cup of something, a silver bowl, drank something, I bet it was good. He hands him a pipe, I bet that was good too. And then there's this translation that starts occurring, this game of telephone, from pre-Mongolian to Mongolian, and then Mongolian into English, and then back and forth like that. And he's asking me these questions, and he's like, well, you know, he's asking my intentions. And I'm trying to explain, I'm like, well, look, I've got satellites and drones, and I'm using ground-penetrating radar, and we're looking without digging, and we're respecting the old ways, but we're trying to find this knowledge to share with the world and all these other things. And it's going in this game of telephone, and none of it's making it through, right? It's like 2 sentences back, and you know, none of it's coming through. But at the end, he keeps asking this one question, which is, what is my intention? And I said, I came here because I wanted to find my roots. He said, okay, well, respect the old ways and share that root. Do it because you were drawn here. Do it for the right reasons, but respect the old ways. That was this moment where we had to decide what we were going to do. We had found this thing. We found the void. There's something underneath. Do we dig? Do we break the very purpose of our being there? Or do we hold, you know, I mean, this is Genghis Khan's tomb, right? Or do we hold our ethic? We left, and from that moment forward, I remembered, it's like, look, it's not about the technology, it's about the intention. My career ever since has been this journey where I run around the world telling stories using a similar approach. I've been, you know, across oceans, across the most incredible deserts the world's ever seen, I've been hanging out of a Black Hawk helicopter or hanging off the cliffs of Peru where you can see there's mummies sitting, dangling, staring out at the horizon for 800 years. An expedition of mine will typically look like this, where we use a drone with a big LiDAR sensor on it that's shooting millions and millions of points through the trees every second. And when you get all those little distant markers, most of it hits the trees, but a tiny fraction of it makes it to the surface of what's beneath the trees. And if we delete everything above it, then all of a sudden we can reveal a world that's been hidden. This is LiDAR. This is what I'm mostly known for. You just delete the trees. And then we run out there with our machetes and we try to go find out what's really there. Sometimes it goes well. It's been an incredible journey. But along the way, I gained some superpowers in the most unexpected way.
No.
About 9 years ago, I found myself lying in a pool of blood and dirt. Everything had been changed. This was my leg. I remember looking down and seeing a big question mark. What would become of me? Who would I be? Could I still be an explorer? Could I still be a dad? Could I still be? My friend kind of understood the moment and realized that the stories we tell ourselves, the messages that we create, they create our possibilities, right? And he came to me in my hospital bed and he says, look at this image. He brings me this one photo of a guy riding this wave in the heart of a barrel wave. Does anybody here surf by any chance? Any surfers? There's got to be a surfer in here somewhere, no? This is the hardest thing to do. It's like the most violent part of the wave. It's also the most epic. And this person's doing this with nothing more than, the grit in his being and this big yellow prosthetic sticking out the back of his leg. I met this person, Mike. He ends up calling me on the phone. He had his leg bitten off by a tiger shark and came back to become one of the most, I'd say, prolific shark conservationists in the world, and this awesome surfer. I wasn't quite there yet, but that single image, one image can change everything. One image can change your understanding of reality. I remembered I had to do the same thing. I had 2 little kids at the time. I was a single dad, and I'm like, well, what are they gonna think? I gotta figure out a way to make this fun. So it was Halloween. We had like a really good costume that year. Like super on point. I remember the neighbors, they were so confused because a lot of them didn't even know that it had happened. So they're like, whoa, what's going on? You really like this holiday. Yeah. I mean, look, it was pretty great. The first thing we did was we went to Disneyland, no lines. I get better parking than most people for the rest of our lives. I mean, it was really awesome. There was a lot of perks, but there was also these parts of the story that I couldn't quite figure out how to grapple with. There was this phenomenon that started taking over, this feeling of something very weird. Has anybody heard of phantom limb pain before? Yeah. I mean, imagine being in this state of agony where something is so painful that it could almost crush you, and yet you go and reach for it, and there's just literally nothing there. It's just air. It's like here. Like imagine if it's just here, and you're just grabbing at it, but it's a part of you. It was the wildest thing. And I happened to meet this person named V.S. Ramachandran, who discovered this process where you could use mirrors to trick the brain into seeing 2 realities, a new reality. You could put this mirror the way that you do as a kid, where you're like floating in the sky when you put yourself halfway through a mirror, but you could see 2 limbs again. And then every time you take the mirror away, all of a sudden the pain would come rushing back. It's like, It's like my brain couldn't hold on to the story. And part of a good story is that it makes you believe it. You gotta hold on to that story. So there's this piece of it where I'm like, do I believe that I'm not in pain? How do I get there? At the time, we were looking at ways of neuroplasticity and how do you get into that. Johns Hopkins had just come out with this research on psilocybin and cancer patients. So we ended up trying that. Giant dose of psilocybin in a mirror, and it worked. It really did. In fact, that's now a clinical trial in a new center that came out of that at UCSD, the Center for Psychedelic Research. But there was also this other path towards neuroplasticity, the story. How do you hold on to a story? I went and found the person who showed me the first story, that guy Mike. And Mike, he's like, okay, well, look, let me go show you how to do this. And it doesn't go exactly as planned. It's definitely not really good. But he goes, Albert, look, the thing I learned while surfing is that when you're riding these waves, he said, look, I used to take photos. He was so good at surfing that he could selfie. He could get a selfie stick going while he was surfing. He's like, I started realizing that I was grimacing in all these photos. And if I'm gonna get sponsored, I can't be grimacing. So he started smiling in the photos while driving, flying down these mountains of water. And he's like, that just made me a better surfer. It's like, okay, I'm gonna try to smile. Yeah, really hard still, but it's like that. But then he introduced me to this guy, Pahaku. And Pahaku is this descendant of chiefs. And he showed me this long line of Hawaiian names that goes back, I don't know, maybe he said to the beginning, to the shark. And Pahaku took me out to the story of his people. And he started showing me the ancient story of the rocks. And he basically said to me this one thing that I've lived with for a long time that's really held my understanding of reality. And it's that waves are created by storms that come from distant shores. You never see the origins when you see them at your shores. They're from far away. You don't get to choose what waves come at you. You only get to choose how you ride them. And that's the moment we're collectively in now. I've been thinking a lot about where this all goes. I mean, I've been looking into the past, into the rocks, into the buildings, into the structures, into the lost cities. But they're only part of it. There's this other piece of it. It's the wisdom, it's the thoughts, it's the intentions behind all that stuff, just like the shamans had said to me. I've been thinking a lot about the moments that we rediscovered wisdom in the past. I learned that the Renaissance was kind of this crazy moment where Greek philosophy was rediscovered thousands of years after it had been lost in Arabic texts, possibly because Genghis Khan had basically opened up the Silk Road, and they made their way into the hands of the Medici, and they translated these ancient philosophies of Pythagoras and Socrates and others that had been completely lost. And all of a sudden, boom, the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, everything today began from one person translating some lost knowledge that had been forgotten. And while we're terrified of AI, we're terrified, like, well, what does it mean? Everybody's like, well, what, are we gonna lose our humanity? All these things, I hear this a lot, and I'm worried about it too, But I think, well, look, there's another opportunity, there's another way to see the moment. Because for the first time, we can actually do this at scale. So what we've been doing lately is we've been bringing a big group of people together. We've been scanning, we've gotten out over 15,000 esoteric manuscripts that we've scanned. And from all over the world, from the Maya, from Asia, from all over. And we're using this in mass to scan through and start searching for connected wisdoms, places where there might be overlapping thoughts, places where we've come to insights. And everybody's like, well, what are you gonna search for? And we were like, well, it's gonna be sex, drugs, and aliens. That's kind of, joking aside, but that's actually, it's really interesting when you search this library. It's like, there's stories about everything. But I think back to the most important story, the beginning story. What is that origin story of us? If we're worried about what we're going to lose, but we want to figure out how to harness this moment to not lose it, rather amplify it, we got to go back to the origin stories. And I just, in a few hours, I'm flying back to DC to go meet up with the National Geographic Society headquarters team, where we've been given this opportunity to go to this site that was just discovered. It's in the mountains of Borneo, where 31,000 years ago, this person died. And my friend just found this skeleton. And they called me and they said, look, there's this thing that's missing, and it's actually the most interesting thing, because you can actually see cut marks from a stone tool, and you can see osteogrowth. That meant that this person had lost their leg 31,000 years ago in a surgery. But from the osteogrowth, this person had lived for up to 10 years after the amputation. 31,000 years ago. I mean, we're talking about a time when there was no modern medicines. There was nothing. And if you cut the femoral artery, you bleed out in 7 seconds. So how did this work 31,000 years ago? But what was the most remarkable part of this story for me was that when they showed me the burial site, and they showed me what was around the burial site, there was this mural of handprints. And to me, this is the story of the people who chose to care. To me, this is the story of one of the earliest stories, or the origin stories, maybe the genesis of our compassion for each other. Who knows? Because at some point we went from the logical ideas that 31,000 years ago in a crazy place like this, that you would depend on your survival by movement, by being a hunter-gatherer, by traveling, by moving. But when somebody was injured, all of a sudden this community came together and they cared for this kid. They actually chose to be together versus apart. So in November, we're headed to this cave, and I'm using the same approach. We're going to scan, we're going to look for all the other caves hidden around there, and they've now found the oldest narrative rock art in the human record in other parts of these caves. So we're going to go re-find this story. We're going to find the story of the first story. The first message. That in our instincts, when the shaman says, what is your intention? What is not the technology, none of it really matters, all this stuff, the AI that we're as a society taking on now, it only really matters what our intentions are with it. And if we go back to what we were in the beginning, then it's a story where we actually chose to help those who needed it. We're going to make a film now. I'm pretty excited about this film. For me, the handprints on the walls, that handprint is the first message, the most important marketing message that we could ever have, is that in the core of our human beings, we are not just about competition and survival and individualism. We're about community. And if that message transcends through this transformative moment, then we're not less human, we're more amplified in our humanness. And when I listen to the sound of that drum, you can feel it in the air. I feel that shaman. Or when I listen to the sound of the bells that rang across the Pacific, or the sound of my kids when they pulled me out from the hospital room. I feel like when I'm listening to you, at the core of what we are, is right there in that cave. And it's right there in this room. We all chose to come together for a reason. We all chose to be here together in this incredible city. And if we're going to market anything, if we're going to say anything, it's because to be human is to care. So I'll see you at the racquetball court in a little bit, and we'll talk about that. But thank you for this time, and I hope that you spread this message of the handprints to the world.